A professional wrestler who performed under the name Jivin J. Knox has been sentenced to serve nearly 2 years following his admittance that he performed grievous bodily harm during a professional wrestling match in February last year. This story caught my eye a few days ago, and after thinking about it for a while, I really do want to do a video on the situation. Reading and rereading the article, more red flags appear, and the situation, honestly, to me, becomes more and more alarming. Not that the situation initially, even if you know the details or the headlines, it's instantly alarming, but as a professional wrestling fan, it's very alarming that this situation has happened in 2020. First of all, before I get into it, what I'm going to do is read the article, well, at least some of it, and give my opinion as we go through this article. It appears in the Metro newspaper website, metro.co.uk. I will try and put a link in the description. There is a 2-minute, 5-second video of the incident attached to the actual article. I'll just talk about that as we go along, but it is very disturbing to watch, I will say. The article was written by a gentleman called Sam Corbishley. Obviously I want to credit him as I'm using the article. So metro.co.uk, if you search wrestling, in there, I'm sure, it was a few days ago, if you search wrestling, I'm sure it will come up. But it is a very alarming and worrying incident. So here is the state of the article. I'll start going through. James Riley, 33, who, as I said, performed under the name Jivin J. Knox, who has apparently said he's now retired from wrestling, but we'll see. James Riley, 33, booted Rob Wilson after a misplaced kick from his opponent aggravated a pre-existing injury during a wrestling bout held in a Dorset scout hub. So we're talking England here, Dorset in England. The junior wrestler, 32, who also works as a sales agent, said his face exploded and he was left unrecognisable after the horrible off-script attack. And I am reading this, by the way, off my phone, just to say. This is one of the most alarming parts of this. This shows you how serious this situation is. He suffered fractures to his eye sockets, nose, jaw and teeth, and had to undergo 3 hours of reconstructive surgery to put metal plates in his face and wire his mouth shut for 6 weeks. A horrific list of injuries there, not just eye sockets, and if you watch the video you'll see the kick, which I'll get to talking about. It's just alarming and just horrible. We said now, pro wrestler Riley, who goes by the name Jivin J. Knox, has been jailed for nearly 2 years after pleading guilty to GBH. So he actually admitted his guilt in court. I want to make that clear. It sounds, from the article it seems that Mr. Wilson from Poole had been a student under Riley and was hoping to become a part-time weekend wrestler. Part of the course was for students to take part in live events or slams in front of a live audience. That's one of the firstly the alarming things. This was Rob Wilson's, I don't know whether he wrestled under his own name or what, but this was seemingly his first match. It goes on a little bit, the next part, just to say that due to circumstances, whatever the situation was going to be was changed, and it ended up being Riley versus Wilson, James Riley versus Mr. Rob Wilson at the event. So that's one of the most alarming things, that this was, Rob Wilson was not an experienced wrestler. This was his, well, it was his only, but this was his debut match, and he was a student under James Riley. Yes, this situation is getting more and more alarming. It just says the fight was blah blah. It says props such as a bacon tray, a chair, and a bamboo cane were used, and it was scripted Riley would end up winning. Honestly, the way that the video is, it's only 2-minute and 5-second video. I don't know whether the full match exists online anywhere, but maybe not because of this court case which has just been decided, but it looks like it possibly be a multi-man match. Now, I don't agree with using such weapons, especially in somebody's first match. Maybe there were more experienced wrestlers involved in the match. I don't know whether it was other trainees. I don't know the full situation of the participants in the match, but I hope it was more experienced wrestlers, because to be honest, using such weapons in a person's first match, that doesn't sit right with me. It never has. I'm not into the really extreme hardcore stuff. Using some of the hardcore stuff with experienced wrestlers sometimes during matches is fine. Not some of the American extreme stuff that you see in the Japanese stuff as well, that you see the death matches and so forth. I don't like that kind of stuff. And I know not everybody can be a technical wrestler, but that's kind of, I don't like that either. It was filmed because Mr. Wilson's had a friend, Mr. Bray, record it to show his wife and family later. Mr. Wilson said, I had concerns going into the match, but because it wasn't rehearsed, because the change to this match was done just a few days before. So he said, I had concerns going into the match, but I trusted he was going to call it and it was going to be okay. The assault was a result of his prior instruction. He was down on the floor, and because I was the antagonist, he said to me that I should stay on top of him when he was down. In other words, keep punishing, keep punching, kicking, keep the attack going. It's all part of the storyline of a professional wrestling match. I caught him with a kick to the gut area. He hissed at me receipt, which is terminology for payback. Before I get to the last part of Mr. Wilson's statement, payback is a thing that happens in pro wrestling, normally between experienced wrestlers, I'll be honest. Payback, giving, or even it's sometimes called sending a receipt, is basically payback. It's allowing your opponent to have a free shot at you. It's basically kind of a wrestling apology. For example, trying to keep this simple, a receipt may be called for if a wrestler makes one or more mistakes. For instance, throwing a punch or kick that's obviously not supposed to really connect, but perhaps they do, in a particular, maybe in a painful area, which just doesn't seem to work. Well, Mr. Riley says he has a pre-existing injury there, but you know, perhaps in a situation like that where you aggravate an injury, or you're making one or two mistakes, sometimes, again, more normally between experienced wrestlers, the opponent will say, well, the wrestler will allow their opponent to have a kind of a free shot of you, apply a hold or move with slightly more force than is normal. Also, one of the normal kind of things of giving or sending a receipt is for the opponent to get the wrestler into the corner or against the ropes and give them a slightly harder than normal kind of chop onto the chest. It's never meant to take advantage of the person. It's never an excuse, which is what seems to happen in this situation. It's never an excuse to take advantage of that person. Part of it's apology. Sometimes, very occasionally, it can be also, I want to get this point across, sometimes it can be to try and get that wrestlers to pay attention to what they're doing. Pro wrestling is very physical, it's very dangerous doing all these moves. Sometimes it can be a situation where the opponent is saying to that wrestler that's made a mistake or two, get your head in the game, pay attention to what you're doing, because obviously if you're not really paying attention to what you're doing in pro wrestling, if you're picking up and slamming and suplexing and doing all these moves, they can be very dangerous if they go wrong. So sometimes it's just an attention grabber thing like, right, hey you, get your head in the game. But again, done properly, it's never intended to take advantage of anyone. It really it shouldn't be that way. Mr. Wilson continues, I caught him with a kick to the gut area. I positioned myself on my hands and knees, and I was expecting him to hit me on the back, but instead he kicked me in the face as if taking a goal kick in football. It was the worst pain I had experienced in my life. Like I said, there's a video, 2-minute 5-second video on the metro.co.uk article page. You really see the kick, and it's a horrendous kick. I really can't emphasise that enough. And like I said, that it is not that I would not claim that. And you're talking about receipt, talking about payback. I wouldn't say that's sending or giving a receipt. I would say that is absolutely taking advantage. The force used on that kick, there was no need for it whatsoever. The article continues. I don't think, does it continue? I think it said it somewhere further down the article, but I'll say this now. Immediately after the kick, you even hear members of the crowd screaming at the referee and any official to stop the match. They realise instantly what's happened, that it wasn't part of the show, and that Rob was genuinely really hurt. I mean, he said his face exploded. It's a little bit blurred and a little bit far away in the video. It is quite blurred because I think it's because they put it up on a newspaper website. But he's obviously immediately injured. He's obviously, I don't know whether he suffered a concussion as well. He certainly must have been out of it a little bit. But it's all very obvious immediately what happens, and that certainly it's unnecessary. Again, his friend Mr. Bray said Riley told other junior wrestlers at his training school the following day he had deliberately kicked Mr. Wilson because he had hit some nerve damage. Again, you know, there is occasion where wrestlers will always carry injuries, even if you're a so-called weekend warrior who does this as a kind of a hobby, an amateur status, like the 99.9% of wrestlers up and down the UK. You know, a large majority of them have full-time jobs, work other things, and obviously do wrestling in their spare time or at weekends. And even those guys will carry some injuries, and you know, wrestling wears down your body eventually, which is why some of them have retired or, you know, left. But again, even considering that damage and the injury, okay, you know, I don't know whether Rob was aware of the damage either. I don't know whether Rob was ever told by Riley, because there was no rehearsal according to the article. It was very quickly that, right, me and you are going to be part of this match at least. I don't know what information was given, but yeah, it definitely wasn't payback. I think the judge was quite right, telling Riley, during the course of this bout, which is a largely fictitious event in the sense that it is largely scripted, you suffered a significant degree of pain because of your pre-existent injury. Your reaction to that was to lose your temper and effectively take revenge. That revenge was a single blow with the foot. The consequences are dramatic. It is aggravated in part because you were the person in charge of the situation. It was a blow by a professional wrestler. I cannot allow a suspended sentence. And he was also given a 10-year restraining order preventing him from contacting the Wilson family. So that is basically the article. In my looking at this entire situation, this was the actions of James Riley was completely unprofessional and unwarranted, in my opinion. He was the one in charge. He was the experienced wrestler of 17 years, I think it says, experience in wrestling. He was the one that the students put their trust in, that Rob Wilson put his trust in to get him through the match, hopefully without injury, because there's always a risk in wrestling about that. But that entirely, and I think I agree with a couple of my friends, especially one promoter who commented on the article when I think I shared it or somebody shared it. I think a couple of people must have shared it. Certainly, that's how I saw the article. But absolutely unacceptable. This, especially in this day and age, to treat students the way it was, because that's one of the most alarming things about this situation, is that Rob was a student of James Riley. He was a student. This was his debut, and it looks like his only professional wrestling match. And obviously, that kind of those type of actions that James Riley took was just unacceptable, and not something that any professional wrestling training school or promotion should put up with. Like I said, especially in 2021, especially with everything that's gone on in pro wrestling in the last year or so, the whole speaking out thing, and just the evolution of the wrestling business itself. And again, I know that people will say, well, it's professional wrestling, it's, in terms of treating students, it's professional wrestling, it's very physical. There is obviously a degree of physicality. Some people have quit or had a few matches and realised it's not for them, but they can't handle the physicality of it. I've seen that personally before myself with one or two wrestlers who they come in, they train, they start doing matches and realise they can't handle the physicality, or it's just not for them for whatever reason. I've seen that happen as well. And obviously there has to be some degree of physical toughness in the training because they have to learn, they have to get their body used to taking the physical punishment, mentally get used to taking the punishment, and understand the cause and effects of it, basically, without going into it too much. But yeah, this whole situation, the actions of James Riley, completely unacceptable. He says he's now retired from wrestling, according to one of the articles I read. Hopefully that is true, because it is an unacceptable situation. I just want to say that obviously one of the things that's really dogged British wrestling and wrestling across the world for many decades is the actions and behaviour of wrestling trainers. And I don't want to go into it too much, but I just want to say to anybody who's training or thinking about training, if you feel that you are not being treated properly, if there are things that really concern you, if you don't get a good answer, if you try and sort it out with those who run the training school and or promotion, you're not happy with the answer and you get, or any behaviour or the actions that they take, you are well within your rights to walk out and go to another training school, go to another promotion, whether it's 25-30 miles down the road from Dundee or to Aberdeen or to even Scotland or wherever you are in the world. If you're not happy with one training or promotion, if you think the behaviour of the trainers, the promoters, is just unacceptable, you're more than welcome to walk out of that promotion or training school and go somewhere else. I know it's something that's very, very difficult to do, so especially if you pay your money before, kind of beforehand, which some training schools do. But yeah, in my opinion, just as a wrestling fan, James Riley's behaviour was unacceptable and completely unprofessional. Unprofessional and unacceptable. I know I'm repeating myself here, but that kind of behaviour, it just shouldn't be tolerated in professional wrestling these days. I really do hope that Mr. Rob Wilson is doing a lot better. I think it's kind of put him off doing wrestling. I don't know whether he's going to be doing any wrestling when the scene begins again, or whether he's going to continue training elsewhere. I don't know whether they'll do a follow-up article on him anytime in the future, but just that kind of behaviour absolutely should not be tolerated.